We had a panel of experts who testified, and they spanned the ideological spectrum. Each and every one of them agreed that illegal immigration has a decidedly negative impact on black wage levels and employment levels. If you've got a significant influx of low-wage labor, what does it do? It depresses wage levels, correct? Illegal immigrants displace black workers in areas that had traditionally been populated by black workers. And the reason for that is because what you find is black workers, particularly black males, are disproportionately concentrated in the low-wage labor market and are disproportionately likely to have no more than a high school diploma. And the same is true for the cohort of illegal aliens, and they compete with one another in areas such as construction, hospitality, service, and agriculture. We had one witness who testified that after he had run the numbers, he found that 40% of the decline in labor participation rates among black workers over 3 decades was attributable to competition from illegal immigration. It comes to nearly 1 million fewer jobs for black Americans as a result of the competition from illegal immigrants. And it's not just the employment levels, it's the wage levels also. But we had evidence from the Fed in Atlanta, which did a study on this, to show that illegal immigrants depressed wages by $960 on average, but in certain sectors, such as the hospitality industry, the depression of wage levels was $1,560. And because black workers were disproportionately concentrated in those areas, they were disproportionately affected.
The mainstream media goes out of its way to avoid the topic of the role that exploding levels of immigration, legal and illegal, plays in the deplorable social and economic conditions of Native Black Americans who populate the nation's urban centers. While these immigrants provide a level of cheap labor that benefits business owners who employ them, immigration negatively impacts the working class and Black Americans in particular. 50 plus years of unfettered immigration has had a devastating impact on Black urban communities, helping to widen an already almost irreversible chasm between wealth and poverty. American policy has historically allowed the massive influx of low-skilled foreign labor to displace Native Blacks in the workforce. Also, most current Black leaders have no desire or are afraid to call this reality into question. However, recent events at the border make this issue hard to ignore, and we must address it as often as possible to reframe the narrative to one that reflects the dire nature of the situation on the ground. As early as 1895, Booker T. Washington recognized the negative impact of immigration on Native Black workers and addressed it in his famous Atlanta Exposition Address. He pushed his audience of powerful white industrialists to halt the importation of millions of workers from Europe to fill factory jobs created by the Industrial Revolution. Washington implored them to put down your bucket where you are and to cast their lot with underemployed freed slaves and their descendants. They did not heed his request, and immigration continued to flourish.
Joining them en masse were new immigrants from overseas. By 1870, they were arriving on American shores at a rate of nearly 400,000 per year. By 1882, this number had doubled to 800,000 annually.
It wasn't until the 1920s, spurred by economic concerns and ethnic prejudice, that America's open-door policies were tightened. The Emergency Quota Act of 1921 was enacted and put in place as the first instance of numerical limits on the number of immigrants who could enter the United States. The Immigration Act of 1924 made these quotas stricter and permanent, and also introduced the visa system we still use today.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the Scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.
And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
On the heels of the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, considered to be a major advancement for American blacks, the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act did away with long-standing national origin quotas that favored European immigrants and replaced it with one that emphasized family reunification and skilled immigrants. This policy all but made the 1964 Civil Rights Act a moot policy as it relates to black Americans. The explosion of immigrants and their descendants fueled by the Immigration Act of 1965 was unforeseen by most, although I have my suspicions on it being a calculated move to offset black progress. Between 1965 and 2015, in absolute numbers, there have been roughly 59 million immigrants to arrive in the United States, flooding unskilled labor markets, causing low-income workers' wages to decline even further. An often ignored dynamic created by unfettered immigration, one that adds insult to an already injurious condition, where we had to contend with regular, run-of-the-mill white racism, but also with discrimination via a phenomenon described by Philip Martin of the University of California at Davis as ethnic networking. Ethnic networks or immigrant networks, though illegal under the auspices of the 1965 Immigration Act, are created when immigrants achieve either numbers or power within an enterprise, and there's power in numbers. Once a level of influence is achieved, these workers will begin to recruit friends and relatives to fill vacancies that arise. This type of infiltration causes a depression in wages and eventually leads to changes in workplace culture, language, etc., which may cause native workers to feel out of place, and many are ultimately displaced altogether. So not only are black Americans forced into competition with immigrant workers, they then turn around and pay higher prices for goods produced by the same immigrant labor.
You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bringing up to the starting line of a race, and then say, you are free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. For The task is to give 20 million Negroes the same chance as every other American to learn and grow, to work and share in society, to develop their abilities, physical, mental, and spiritual, and to pursue their individual happiness. To this end, equal opportunity is essential, but not enough. Not enough.
In addition to this vicious cycle eating away at black economic progress, systems put in place to rectify centuries of chattel slavery and exploitation against native blacks, namely affirmative action, had to be shared with newly arrived bodies with numbers that eventually eclipsed their own. The fact of the matter is, there has been an over-proliferation of unfettered immigration, many times under the guise of diversity and inclusion, and it has occurred at too rapid a pace to be properly managed, and its effects accurately gauged. I am advocating for a moratorium on the importation of foreign workers as a way to begin improving economic conditions of blacks who populate the inner cities. This type of policy would also benefit recent immigrants whose labor realities are also challenged by additional immigration. The current administration has set us on a crash course for economic disaster and has spawned a border crisis of historical proportions via executive actions and policy changes with the intention of dismantling immigration enforcement and controls on one hand and subsidizing massive amnesty proposals on the other.
In fact, that's the real amnesty. Pretending we can deport 11 million people or build a wall without spending tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer money is abetting what is really just factually incorrect. It's not going to work.
The bill before us will certainly do some good. It will authorize some badly needed funding for better fences and better security along our borders, and that should help stem some of the tide of illegal immigration in this country.
Senator McConnell wanted me to negotiate the wall with President Trump. I said to him two things. First, it's not a negotiation, no wall. And second, I said, only you can persuade him that he shouldn't do the wall because it'll cause a government shutdown. Illegal immigration is wrong. And a primary goal of comprehensive immigration reform must be to dramatically curtail future illegal immigration. Second, operational control of our borders through significant additional increases in infrastructure, technology, and border personnel must be achieved within a year of enactment.
Americans must demand that our political leaders make every effort to protect American workers' interests here at home, and this means protecting our borders against illegal immigration, as well as managing legal immigration in a way that ensures the prospects and stability of the native workforce. Putting a halt to immigration for a time would be cost efficient, and it would be a simple fix to many issues caused by unfettered immigration, and we already have systems in place to help us toward that end. And here are 5 ways we can shore up American borders and protect American workers. Number 1, fully reinstate Title 42, which allows the denial of entry of migrants who pose a health risk regardless of age. Issued by the CDC, Title 42 allows CBP to quickly expel people caught entering the U.S. illegally due to the pandemic. The Biden administration has exempted unaccompanied alien minors, creating an incentive for families to send their children to the border. Number 2, require those seeking asylum to make a claim in the first safe nation, and require asylum seekers to remain in Mexico while their claim is heard. No more catch and release. Number 3, reinstate agreements with all Northern Triangle nations, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, to accept and protect asylum seekers closer to their home countries. Number 4, make every effort to ensure all families and unaccompanied minors who come here illegally are reunited safely at home. And number 5, allow ICE to do its job by removing arbitrary limitations on who may be arrested or removed, as well as abolish all sanctuary cities. Lowering immigration numbers would just be a start in solving the myriad and torturous problems of Black Americans. Much more needs to be done, but we must force the conversation.
Men and women of all races are born with the same range of abilities. But ability is not just the product of birth. Ability is stretched or stunted by the family that you live with and the neighborhood you live in, by the school you go to and the poverty or the richness of your surroundings. It is the product of 100 unseen forces playing upon the little infant, the child, and finally the man.